Hi everybody, it's Andy, and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York, and in this video I'm going to try to go over something called the political question doctrine. Now, this doctrine is not specific to California, specific to New York. It sort of, applies generally across the United States. It stems from a Supreme Court case, actually, back from the 60s, which I'll refer to kind of later on in the video. But this is not state-specific, so even if you're outside California, you're outside New York, this video will apply to you also. The precise details about how your state, for example, does it might be slightly different, but the idea of political question, it exists in every state. So I guess the genesis of this video basically is that a while ago I put out a blog post, which I'll try to find and kind of pop up in a card above my head here. But the basic idea of that blog post, though, was to go over something in California called a claim form. So I guess, not sure if most people know this, but it's something where in California, under the law, you cannot sue the government like you would sue like a normal person or a normal company. You have to, a lot of times, go through a claim form process, give the governmental entity a opportunity, I guess, to kind of approve your claim, reject your claim, and then only after it's rejected can you then file a lawsuit, etc. So it's something where it's not hard, I guess, to comply with the claim form process in California, but it is basically a hoop that, unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't know about, so they don't bother jumping through it, I guess, if that's the right analogy. And because they don't jump through that hoop properly, later on, if they try to file suit, a lot of times they realize that they can't because they did not know about this easy, simple thing that they had to do. So that's the blog post that I kind of linked up above, kind of in a nutshell. A lot of people actually have found that blog post and they're reading it far broader than I ever intended. And they're asking about how to sue XYZ agency of the government, XYZ agency of the state, the county, the police department, whatever. So the questions are broad enough, I guess, and I figured it's something where political question actually applies to enough of them that I think it'd be more efficient for me to kind of address the doctrine kind of en masse like this via a video. So I guess for those of you who've never been to law school, or I guess for those of you who went to law school but it was ages ago, political question generally is taught, at least in the United States, during the first year of constitutional law. So it's something where you learn about it at the same time with mootness, ripeness, standing. If you went to law school, hopefully those terms sound familiar to you. But political question generally is taught kind of in that sort of segment, I guess, of constitutional law. So in terms of what political question doctrine is, there really is no kind of good, real life sort of analogy that I can think of. So I'm going to try to illustrate it with an example. So in general, when you elect an official, let's say we're talking about a mayor, let's say the mayor of a city, you're generally not going to micromanage that person. You're not going to specify his or her role so narrowly that they basically are handcuffed. They can't really do stuff on a day-to-day basis. They always have to get permission from the city council or something. So you're practically speaking, you can't do that because real life is more complicated than just that. So what you're generally going to do is you're going to elect an official and give him or her some level of freedom to kind of do things on their own, I guess. So, for instance, this is why a lot of times elected officials will say, hey, this is my platform. I'm running because of this. These are my priorities. This is what I intend on doing, blah, blah, blah. So, it's kind of arguable about whether or not politicians keep their promises, but the idea is that you elect an official based on a broader set of goals. And then the actual detail day-to-day about how they accomplish those goals a lot of times is left up to the individual politician. So hopefully if that makes sense, let me sort of illustrate it with an example. So again, let's say we're talking about a mayor. And if it's a mayor, and let's just say in my scenario that the mayor has the responsibility of creating a budget for the city each year. And the mayor has discretion about how to allocate funds. Most of the time, to be honest, it's probably a situation where the mayor doesn't have enough money to fund everything. So there's going to have to be some cuts here and there, some increases here and there. So it's not a simple matter of the mayor can just give every department in the city whatever money they want. So let's say, for instance, that the mayor, this particular mayor's priority is school funding. So they're going to, school funding has to be at 100% because this mayor really feels strongly about that. And in order to fund it, because again, there's not enough money to go around, in order to fund it properly, the mayor has to cut money from somewhere. And let's just say, for instance, that the mayor decides to cut it from police, fire, and just kind of public safety generally. Now, if you're like a member of the electorate, like if you live in the city, and you just happen to disagree with how this mayor is doing it, like let's just say that he's cutting, this mayor is a he, let's say he's cutting public safety, but then you don't think that's correct, and you think instead that the mayor should cut from, I don't know, city administration or something. Is that something that you would sue to sue the mayor for? I would submit that the answer to that is no. So if that is your situation, let's say the mayor is doing something that you don't like because the mayor's priorities are different than yours, your remedy is not to sue the mayor. Your remedy is to basically recall the mayor, for example. Your remedy is to vote for a different mayor next time. Your remedy is to campaign for a different mayoral candidate next time, let's say. Your remedy is not to sue in court, but it's to remove this mayor in some way. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I don't mean to say by virtue of this example that you can never sue a mayor. So to kind of continue with my budget example, let's say, for instance, that the mayor is cutting funding from certain departments in order to increase funding for other departments. That's something that, let's just say for sake of argument, is within the mayor's, ability, discretion to do. If you disagree, then, you don't sue for that. You generally vote for a different mayor, recall the current mayor, etc. However, let's say that let's say that the city's laws require that the mayor produce a budget, compose a budget, submit the budget for public comment for 30 days. And during those 30 days, the public has an opportunity to submit comments, to critique the budget proposal, etc. At the end of the 30 days, let's say, maybe something has to happen, and maybe sufficient number of negative comments means that the mayor has to go back and redo it or something. So let's say that there's a hard and fast law that applies here that basically says the mayor has to give the public at least 30 days to comment on this proposed budget. And let's say, for sake of argument again, that this mayor has not done that. So let's say that the mayor doesn't do the 30-day comment period. Let's say the mayor only gives it 2 weeks. Let's say the mayor doesn't do the public comment period at all. So the public has no ability to comment on this proposed budget. Can you sue for that? So this is my example, but I would say that that situation is fundamentally different. So on the one hand, you have the mayor who is allocating money in a way that you don't like. On the other hand, you have a mayor who's not following the law about public comment, let's say. So I would say that these two situations are different. You probably cannot sue for this because this is something where you just recall the mayor, you vote for a different mayor, etc. This one, I'm thinking that you probably could sue. Haven't done it myself, and this is completely made up, but these two situations are basically different. You might be able to sue here, probably not here. So the idea, I guess, if you can kind of understand that these two situations are different and your remedies will be different. That's what political question doctrine is basically in a nutshell. So the way that I learned about political question doctrine actually in law school, I want to say, I don't remember the name of the case, but it was a case involving the Secretary of the Interior, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, and it was something where he was doing something about conservation of a landmark or something where he designated something to be like a historical monument or a national landmark or a wildlife preserve or something, and he, I guess, didn't. I'm stretching here, but I want to say that he didn't designate it in such a way that this particular conservation group wanted. So this conservation group sued, and they basically lost because the court basically said, well, hey, if you disagree with how this elected official is doing his or with this political official is doing his or her job, your remedy is not to sue, but your remedy is to convince the president to replace the Secretary of the Interior. Your remedy is to vote for a different president who appoints a Secretary of the Interior that you like better, etc., etc. So hopefully that kind of made sense. Based on that description, I'm wondering if some of you actually know the case that I'm talking about. If you do, leave me a comment down below. Just for the life of me, I don't remember that case. I remember the facts, sort of, but not the case name. So if that makes sense, I'm going to mention a case here. The case is called Baker versus Carr, which I'll write over here, as well as link down below. It's a U.S. Supreme Court case from 1962. And that one actually is basically the landmark case that goes over political question doctrine. It goes over, there's a six-part test that political question doctrine kind of involves about what is, more likely to be, something that the courts will not decide for political question reasons. I'm not going to describe the six-part test right here because if you read it, it actually is quite involved. The Baker versus Carr case goes over it. If I can, no promises, but if I can fit the six-part test down in the description below, I'll go ahead and do that. But there's a six-part test basically in the Baker case that goes over what political question doctrine is. So hopefully all of that made sense. Just kind of summarize, the political question doctrine is something that basically acknowledges that certain problems are not things that the courts are really empowered or authorized to resolve. So if you read enough court cases in California, a lot of times you'll see that courts oftentimes will say, well, we are a judicial branch. This is not our job to make law. We ask that the legislative branch do this, or we leave that to the legislature, or we leave that to the president or the governor or whoever. Like courts, a lot of times in their own decisions will acknowledge that they only have certain abilities as the judicial branch of government. The legislative branch has certain responsibilities, the executive branch has certain responsibilities, and so on. So, yeah, I guess hopefully all that made sense. The reason I wanted to bring up political question is because it's something that if you sue the government, you are inevitably going to run into political question in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, suing the government is not, well, sorry, let me back up. This is one way in which suing the government, for example, is different than suing a private individual, a company, things like that. So, yeah, again, hopefully all that helps. Go ahead and watch this video again, share it, comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.